We want to expand a little bit more our discussion about what makes for a good business opportunity. And so in looking at that, I'm going to suggest that there's some criteria that we must follow in evaluating an opportunity. And typically, it revolves around 5 issues in the marketplace. Whether you're engaged in traditional business planning or hypothesis-related lean startup approaches, these issues are fundamental to understanding the building blocks of a solid opportunity. The first opportunity that I want to talk about is the market. The market is almost everything because the market means an understanding of the customer. We want you to be able to understand how big is the market, the potential market, the theoretically addressable market, the market share that you can capture, your rate at which you can penetrate the market, the growth rate of the market. All of these are data points that give you some notion of the size of the market and the share that you may be able to capture for a set of customers. In consumer-driven markets, how you position in the head of a consumer, your value proposition, and how it's packaged are also important. You'll be learning about the 4 Ps. That is the product itself, how it is priced, how it is promoted, and where it is placed. That is the channel upon which you sell. All of those enter into capturing the minds of the customer that may be willing to buy your service or your product. But whatever it is you can sell at a certain price, there's a certain amount of variable costs associated with that. And the difference between price and variable costs is the gross margin, a very important economic consequence of business activity. Is your gross margin sustainable in this marketplace? Or is the competition such that it is eroding your ability to charge the margin you need to sustain the capital you've deployed in this particular activity? The gross margin then is an important concept as well. Lying right behind the gross margin, whereas the market share can help you with prices and customers, is the cost architecture of your business. There's some supply chain dynamics that one has to worry about, but is the operation itself providing a cost structure that you can live with, not just the costs that are necessary to produce the product, the variable costs, but then the overhead and ancillary, the more indirect costs that might be necessary to bring the operation to fruition. One way of examining that is looking at the value chain. What does it take to produce your product or service all up and down the line with the various factors of production? Now, if the market issues were not enough, closely tied to them are what I'm calling economic harvest issues. This is the ability to then look at the opportunity and say, is this one really worthwhile for the capital I need to deploy? The first concept, of course, is profits, looking at the income statement. Revenues minus variable costs, and the gross margin, taking away then the indirect expenses, you're left with the profits after taxes. Are your profits after taxes large enough to satisfy what it is that you're interested in? An important concept in getting to this is what I call break even. This is where the total revenues are equal to the total costs. And can you calculate the level of output or the number of units you need to sell in any given time period to cover your fixed costs? A related concept here then is what you learned in looking at the market, namely the contribution margin, because the break-even level is equal to the level of fixed costs that you decide to sustain divided by the contribution margin. All businesses need positive cash flow, and so it is important that your activities at some point begin to generate cash and begin to turn around from whatever negative you may have experienced in getting to this rate of output. Investors are interested in the simple concept of payback. That's just simply, when will the investment be paid back? And so the amount of cash that might be available divided by the investment gives you the payback period, which is particularly important. In economic harvesting, you're worried about things like the rate of return on investment and the required investment that would give you the payback that's necessary. And these are all concepts related to the value you create, when you will exit, and what then has to be distributed to all who participated in providing the investment dollars that would generate the cash flow beyond the break-even and the level of profits that can then be available to those who participated in building the enterprise. The third set of criteria that's important was what I call the competitive advantage issues. And I put understanding your costs right at the top. Understanding the fixed costs and understanding the variable costs, and keep coming back then to that contribution margin, because that is critical in sustaining your ability to compete. Of course, it is squeezed by what happens in the marketplace to prices, so some of the fundamental market equilibrium dynamics that we talked about in our earlier module come to play. Then the supply chain issues, the production, how it is run, and the marketing, how it is sold, or the impressions you make in the marketplace, and then how it is distributed are important variables as well. And you can have an advantage in any one of these. You could have a different kind of plant relative to the industry average, different ways of marketing, again, relative to what everybody else is doing, or maybe unique channels to reach customers in a way that gives you an advantage. The whole idea here is about trying to find a competitive advantage. And you can do it in how you handle your costs and how you price and how you manage your supply chain. But it's also good to have barriers. Barriers really simply are where there are things that you do, perhaps tangible resources, perhaps regulatory barriers that make it difficult for a competitor to enter the business and compete with you on the same basis. It has to be much more expensive. The barriers have to be higher. And this is where some of the strategic notions that we've learned from Professor Porter, the 5 forces, really come into play. There's a rivalry in the industry, and there's what goes on from a potential for substitutes or entry. All of those affect, and then of course the negotiating and the balance that might exist from the power that customers have and the powers that suppliers have. Supplier power, bargainer power, the rivalry in the industry, and then of course entry and or exit, and of course customers leaving for substitutes or being enhanced by complements, are all the forces that either help the barriers that you're trying to produce or hinder them. A word about legal and regulatory considerations. Businesses and industries exist in a space, and governments, and we serve customers really at the pleasure of the governments and the locale in which we do business. So understanding what the legal environment is like and the regulatory considerations can be an important competitive advantage to an existing supplier. I am reminded often by what marketing folks call the 3 C's. And this just simply refers to the company itself, the competition, and then the most important person, of course, is the customer. How does the customer and be thinking about what those are as you seek advantage? And then the 4 P's, how you price your product and how you place it and how you promote it, are all elements that, if done differently than what's prevailing, can give you an advantage. I would be remiss if I didn't complete this module, this particular section, by talking about people. Human resources are absolutely essential through everything. You've got to have the right talent to assist you in this process. Talent that is intelligent enough to understand how these things work, understand how the market works, and understand the various factors that we've been talking about can come together to create advantage. Because in the end, your biggest advantage is an informed workforce and people who know what they're doing. Talking about people, well, we need to focus directly then on management issues. Who are the people here as we think of this opportunity that will execute? What is their fit? What is their track record? Are there gaps in the management team that need to be filled, as it were, to fully exploit the opportunity that's been identified? And so how you look at the founders and the skills they bring to the table, and the gaps become very, very important. I always look for what I'm going to call goal congruency. Have I assembled the right group of people in a de minimis fashion that are essential to getting the job done? And are they aligned with where we want to take the company? And if they're not aligned, then there'll be gaps, and then people may need to be replaced. And this is not an easy question, but this is about building the business and taking advantage of the opportunity and having the right people in place. Can you trust them? How about their standards of behavior? Their ethics compatible with yours? And can you build then a culture around these people that give you comfort that they can be there to do what needs to be done as you exercise strategic leadership? The management team is of critical importance. And finally, let me just say that differentiation is everything. If you can differentiate strategically, more than just by being the low-cost producer, but giving teeth to how you are different, I think you have a much better way of being successful. And in today's marketplace, technology is a leveler. Are you up to date? What kind of technology are you using? We can see how technology has wiped out certain industries that were doing very well, that didn't adopt fast enough. So obsolescence in ways of doing business is critical, and one needs to pay close attention to the kind of to the forces technology may bring on the ability of customers to do different things, or alternatives that are presented then to suppliers to organize how they do business in going after your customers. I think service is important in a technical world, and one can differentiate themselves by being able to service their customers a little better than the other person. It's not enough just to have the product, but it's something else to recognize the service that's supposed to go with it, to be a total solution for a customer. After all, it is a customer's problem that keep you in business, and understanding the totality of it can make it very easy for you. How you design the jobs then is also a way to think about being different. Some organizations have different individuals to do different parts in the supply chain, and maybe a better way of doing that is to having one individual who can really do 3 or 4 things. As you can see, the design of the job has a lot to do with how the team fits together and the kind of talent you actually need to get things done. In this world today, channels are very important. There's the online channel here now that's become radical for a lot of consumer-facing gifts. You don't often need to go to the mall or to the store. You can shop sitting right there in your living room. And of course, you pay sometimes for that convenience, or sometimes you are rewarded with lower prices. So the pricing that you place through your different channels is particularly important to your ability to be different from a strategic point of view. I say pricing is still one of the most powerful weapons of the 4 Ps that you might have. So think very hard and long about how you want to charge for your service. Are you going to enter too low or too high? If it's too low, it's very hard sometimes to rise. If it's too high, it may be difficult to get higher. So how you initially start is a very important way as to how you see the market evolving, having developed an understanding of who these customers are. In the end, you have to be opportunistic on all these variables, whether it's technology or service, and have to be willing to be adaptive over time. And it is understanding then how these issues all fit together that gives you the total solution in evaluating the opportunity. And so let me conclude by reminding you that these are the 5 criteria that you need to think about when you assess an opportunity. Everything related to the market and the customer, things related to the investor and the opportunity to harvest economically, how you're going to seek advantage to make all of that happen, what people you're going to have engaged in this process, and are there enough elements in here where you can be truly different to sustain a contribution margin that is sustainable.